AP Tone, college football playoff rankings and bracket come out last night. Seemingly there's going to be people upset about everything.
Yep.
How'd you feel about how it all turned out?
I felt fine. I thought the Big Ten had a big night, obviously having 4 teams in the top 5. And it's kind of disappointing in IU fans last night. There was a lot of bitching coming from them, even though they were the 5th ranked team in the country, talking about how ESPN's already setting it up for an SEC team to kick them out. I don't think so. As long as they don't win, as long as they don't lose by, 14 plus next week against Ohio State, I think the Big Ten is pretty secure with 4 teams in there, and I think IU is pretty safe in that situation. I think the committee kind of set up a situation where Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and then a 4th SEC
I mean,
team.
A&M got Texas last week, too.
Yeah.
You beat Texas, obviously.
They
That's
control their destiny.
Exactly. I think they're setting up for – there's those teams, those SEC teams lurking there in the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 situation where if a Notre Dame slips up, that's who's going to fall out. That's who an SEC team will take the place of. Or if BYU somehow slips up, can Boise then jump up into the 4 seed as far as the playoff bracket goes? Like, can they get the bye in that situation? So I don't think the Big Ten has anything to worry. I think it was a good night for the Big Ten. I think they're going to get 4 teams in. And then they're setting it up kind of like putting SMU at 14 there, like in case Miami doesn't win. I think there's a situation where that's where an SEC team could find their way in there, like a 5th SEC team.
And we'll ask Reese about this because the AP does their ranking, right?
Yeah.
The AP does their top 25. The CFP does their top 25. I feel like the CFP people, and it's the first year of the 12-team bracket, they should just put out the bracket and have them ranked that way, as opposed to it being – this is 12 seed, but it's actually 3 seed, 6 seed, but actually 3 seed. College Football Playoff Committee should be only thinking about the college football playoff bracket, I think personally, because there's so many different confusions that could happen with numbers, and we're ranked this, but we're actually this and this. It's like I feel like as we kind of go through this entire thing, it'll get easier to understand for everybody, because right now the story is just like 12 teams are going to be in there, 12 teams are going to be in there. But when you start getting in the weeds, it's like, well, why is this team this, and then they're actually this? It's like, well, the championship advantage. But P4 champion, Power 5 champion, then who's the high? It's like, I think they should just put out the bracket and then say, here's the teams that are out and how they look going forward, as opposed to trying to do the whole song and dance. It's almost like they're trying to do the AP vote while then also filling in their own college football playoff bracket. And it's like, A, do we need that every single week? Because it doesn't matter till the last one.
Right.
And B, do you need to do that? Just give us what the bracket would look like right now if you guys were put it out, as opposed to the number confusion. Personally, that's what I think should happen.
No, I mean, I think that's the right way, because all of us, like, we're watching college football every single week and following.
In the weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Following it big time. There are plenty of people who are casual fans who are checking in, and it was kind of confusing. You know, they pop up the top 13 or whatever, the first team out and all that kind of stuff on the side, and then they're just bouncing around to where the different slots are. Like, do it exactly like the NCAA tournament for basketball does the selection show. Boom. 12 seed, 5 seed.
Well, so Georgia's the 12 seed, 12-team playoff.
Exactly.
They're good. Nope.
No.
Actually, they're the first one out.
Right.
Because Power 5, 13, they're actually in. It's just like there's a lot for people to take in. It's the first year. But I think College Football Playoff Committee doesn't have an easy job. Okay, we're not saying you have an easy job at all. But I think you shouldn't be worried about doing the whole ranking top 25. You guys should just put the bracket out.
Yeah.
And then say, here's the first teams out, and here's the reason why. Like, I think that would make it easier, but also we could all probably learn as we go forward.
Well, and like I get having respect for the AP, but at the end of the day, like what the AP says doesn't really matter anymore, because it ends up being
let
just
them do their own thing.
Exactly, and they can, and it's sweet. In Georgia, you know, they can be pumped that they're in the AP's top 12, but at the end of the day, the AP's top 12 doesn't mean shit, and that's why when they are doing the entire college football playoff reveal, it did get confusing, because there's one number next to the team, and then there's the other number next to the team. Like you mentioned, BYU got 3, but then next to BYU's 3 is like 9 or whatever the hell. It's 6. Yeah, it's like, well, that number doesn't mean shit anymore, so there's no point to put it there. So it does make sense, but this is awesome. That's why every week ends up being a playoff game, because Tennessee, Georgia this weekend is a playoff game, because if Georgia loses, they're done. They're definitely not getting in. Whereas if Tennessee loses, then Georgia and Tennessee almost flip, where it's like, okay, is Tennessee now one of those, first teams out, and Georgia all of a sudden becomes one of those teams that's automatically in.
Reese will talk to us more about that in 7 minutes. Cannot wait to hear his thoughts on it all and his take on what should this look like going forward. We didn't like the fact that you had to wait for these college basketball games to end. Now, they were great basketball games. We will certainly talk about that in a bit, because you're one of the voices of college hoops as well. What did you learn last night for the college football playoff bracket being released, and what are your thoughts on it all, Reese?
I think the one thing that I learned, Pat, was that they are valuing the way the team looked as opposed to, say, strength of schedule. That benefits Indiana for sure because they have looked like a playoff team. The resume might not quite be there. And for Georgia, Georgia has the number one strength of schedule in the country, but they've had a couple of games where they didn't look the part, or at least the vast majority of the Alabama game and none of the Ole Miss game. So, they are now first team out, despite the fact that they're, have the toughest path of anyone so far. So those were the two big takeaways, and probably the fact that the ACC and the Big 12, more likely than not, are only going to get one team in the field.
Which we kind of, and by we, I mean this particular program, as we were kind of looking at the 12-team playoff, we knew it was going to be Big Ten SEC heavy. We knew that, which is why the championship of the other conferences was such a big deal, because it's an automatic bid. But the strength of schedule conversation is going to be one that's going to be massive. Obviously, Georgia has played in like 4 top 5 matchups. Add another one happening this weekend, or, big top 10 matchup against Tennessee. It's like when push comes to shove, that's the biggest deal. And how did the Big 12 or ACC ever catch up, for years going forward with the depth of the Big 10 and the SEC and them only seemingly getting better as we roll on?
I wish I knew how to tell you that they could catch up. I think it will be probably the occasional year where they have multiple teams. And the ACC is close now. I mean, SMU and Miami both are worthy playoff type teams if they were to finish strong. So I don't think it's beyond the realm of comprehension that they could get a couple. It just seems a little less likely than the others. But I think it's going to be really hard to catch up, Pat, because there is a divide. You see it every week when we're on game day. It's just different in the SEC and the Big Ten from the others. Doesn't mean that there aren't teams in the other conferences who have done well against certain teams from the SEC or the Big Ten. But just taken from top to bottom, there's a difference there, and it's being reflected in the standings. And I think if you see teams from those two conferences start to lose bids, then it sort of highlights the merits of the argument, which I haven't been in favor of, but merits of the argument if they expand to 14 or 16, that those two conferences have a guaranteed number of bids, sort of like it would be more of an NFL-style race to try to make sure that you get into the playoff.
Like if you make it to the finals of your championship, you're in. Like the two Big 12 finalists would make it into the bid. The two ACC championship.
Well, Big 12.
What?
Maybe not the two Big 12 finalists, but the SEC.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, how
he just said he was talking about when it goes to 14, those other conferences getting more automatic bids.
Mountain West,
but also the SEC and the Big 10
over the Big 12
right now.
Okay, all right. Connor's taking a dump on the Big 12.
ACC.
That's what I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. Now, and then you do have to think like Colorado is still potentially very much in it.
Yeah.
What's Colorado look like next year? What's the turnover of these teams look like going forward? Every year is going to have its own conversation and drama and blowback, but there's a big one happening around Indiana, more specifically because of the strength of schedule happening everywhere. Go ahead, AQ.
Yeah, Reese, with Indiana's strength of schedule being such a big talking point, if they have a big loss to Ohio State, do you see them bouncing all the way out of the top 12?
I think it's possible if it's a big loss. I was just thinking about this today because I kind of get put out with the people who, immediately, no matter what the committee says, they're outraged, they're disgusted. How can this happen? They don't know what they're talking about. Indiana has answered the questions that at least I deem important. Do you look like a playoff team? Have you handled your competition well? How often have you played at your best? And the only place they fall short is who have you done it against? So I do think the way they play against Ohio State will be important. And I don't foresee this happening. I think Indiana's a really good football team. But if they were to have happened to them by Ohio State, what, say, the Hoosiers did to Nebraska, beat them 56-7, then I think it calls into question some of the other things that we've seen, most notably, okay, who have you done this against? If you go and play well, and you just happen not to beat a team that I think is capable of winning the national championship in their stadium, then I think Indiana's a lot to make the playoff. I think it's far more likely than not that they will, regardless of what happens in Columbus. But the only scenario that I could see them, other than getting upset by Purdue or something ridiculous.
Whoa! Don't even put that out there. Don't even put that out there.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right. I apologize. I apologize for that. If I may borrow from you, my friend, they didn't deserve that, so I apologize for that.
No problem.
But but if they play well against Ohio State, I think they've looked like a playoff team from start to finish over the course of the season and deserve to be there. But that strength of schedule number is not one of the things that's going to help their cause. It's going to be one of the things that they have overcome by the way they play.
Hey, football judgment, does that mean like how they execute plays, how the ball comes out, how the offense looks, let alone who you're playing? But like, would this hold up against a great team is what they're trying to do in football judgment, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a term that I like to use. Some people call it the eye test, but we have people in that room who have played and coached at the highest level. And when they look at that team, how good do they think they are? Absent the metrics. Now, the record should count. The results have to matter. I'm not saying that. But when you watch the team play, are they executing well? Do they look like a playoff team? It's not just, recruiting stars or size, speed, anything like that. How do they execute? Do they look like a team that is worthy of being on that stage? And I think Indiana has passed that test easily.
Okay, let's go to Hammer Dahn. AP Tone has a question for you, Reese.
All right, Reese, this is a hypothetical, and I'm wearing the Army hoodie today for a reason. Let's just say that Army somehow beats Notre Dame next week.
Whoa!
Okay? Mm-hmm. And then they're undefeated. They beat Navy. They win their conference championship. And then you have Boise. Their one loss is a very, 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 very close loss to the number one ranked Oregon team. Is there a world where Army and Boise could both get in?
Wow. I thought you were going to ask me something else. I don't think so, Tony. I don't think you could get them both in. Okay. It would take some teams really falling on their face and falling out of contention to open up that type of scenario. I think that what it would take for Army to get in would be for Boise State to lose. Army right now, it'll get better with the games you've mentioned, although the Navy game, this will all be decided prior to the game against Navy that they play, assuming that they don't play them in the championship game, which seems unlikely right now. So it'll all be decided by them. But at this moment, they have the second easiest schedule in the country. So, for all the talk about Indiana and even Texas for that matter, Texas' schedule is not terribly strong. Army is that to an extreme. So they'll need some help. I think they'll need Boise State to lose for sure, and they'll need to finish undefeated and look good against Notre Dame.
Okay, so they might be pissed, but there's going to be somebody or numerous people that are not happy at the end, even though we got 12 instead of 4. Connor has a question for you.
Yeah, Reese, who do you think is going to be the most pissed that they get left out of the playoff, and why is it Georgia, especially if Texas ends up going on to win the SEC title game and Georgia's the only team that beats the SEC champion?
It will be Georgia if they were to not make it. Now, if they beat Tennessee, I think they'll probably be in good shape. But if they were to lose a close game to Tennessee, then you would start to look at the entire strength of schedule. A lot of that is because of how their conference draw came out. That's just the luck of the draw. But they also played Clemson. And the one thing I think is if you leave a team like Georgia out with a marquee win, like it has against Texas, a near miss at Alabama, and let's say, Tennessee, who would then be a top 4 or 5 team, if not higher, beats them, and you leave Georgia out completely, are you not incentivizing then teams to say, well, I'm going to make my schedule as easy as possible? And they may not control the conference portion of it, but you're also sort of cutting away at this outcry people have had to try to have the SEC go to 9 games, which I think they should. But if you're not going to reward it, then I think that's a problem. But I'm going to offer this one little caveat about that. Georgia, sort of like Indiana against Ohio State, Georgia needs to play well. If they play as they did against Ole Miss, they don't look like a playoff team. They didn't look like a playoff team against Ole Miss.
Isn't it crazy? Carson Beck was, he's in love though.
Of course,
he's in love, very public. Did you see old buddy celebrating with his friends at Ole Miss too?
Yeah, that was tough.
Kirby,
what is that about?
This guy's an idiot. And then everything else that goes on now, it's like Georgia. If they're able to navigate their way to the tournament, I think everybody's like, look out for the dogs.
Yeah.
Look out for the dogs. Even though we've seen this all, look out for the dogs. But it's like Carson hasn't looked like Carson Beck, And now, granted, you lose Ladd McConkey, who we see doing good things. You lose Brock Bowers, which we see doing great things. He lost a lot of premier talent on that offensive side. But I think we all kind of expected more out of Carson. Still got time. Get a big-time win against Tennessee this weekend. Obviously, everything kind of starts to change in this entire thing. Ty has a question for you about some of the championship bids.
Yeah, Reese, moving forward after this year, I know a big part of the whole situation was, hey, they want to place importance on the conference championship itself. But do you see a world where maybe, next year, based on if Ohio State were to win the Big Ten championship and Oregon then, who's arguably been the best team in college football almost the whole year, slides down to that 5 spot where we have BYU at 3, is there a world where one of these maybe one-loss SEC or Big Ten schools in the future will still get one of those automatic buys, and they'll kind of do away with, hey, if you win the Big 12 championship or you win the ACC championship, you're automatically going to get a first-round bye?
I sure hope so, because I think that if you're going to have a committee seed the teams, then we should stick with what they seed. And taking a team that, is ranked 9th and moving it into a bye is not the way to do this, in my judgment. Even Boise State, if Boise State were to finish ranked ahead of the ACC or the Big 12 champion, they would move in to that bye situation. So as we expand this, what I hope they do is continue to give the automatic bids, continue to give access to the conference champions, because that has been important to all of the stakeholders in college football. But when it comes to seeding, seed it the way you rank it. Or else you can have a formula if you want to. Whatever you do, I don't really see the merit in having a team that is ranked, 6, 7, 8, 9 somehow be seeded 3rd. I don't think that's the way to do this. So I hope that happens.
Reese, you know what? And we talked about this earlier. I think that the college football playoff every single Tuesday, if they're going to continue to do it every single week, they should just put out the bracket and not even do the top 25 where we're dealing with 13 is actually a 6, and that they should just put out what the bracket is.
Yes.
That's what I think, personally, for people to maybe understand it easier. But after 1 year of it, maybe people understand it easier anyways going forward. How do you feel about that?
It's a confusing thing, and that's why, we've done this every single time we talk playoff on game day. We've done it every single top 25 show, and I still know that on selection day, because it's a little confusing and because people have real world lives and they're paying attention to their team and how their team is doing. And it's going to happen. They're going to go, wait, what do you mean BYU's ranked 6, but they're the 3 seed? Why? So I think it just creates more confusion. So I hope that we'll get to that point. I like the reveal show. I've done it for 10 years, so it's kind of fun, or 11 years now. So it's kind of fun. But you're right. The fact that the rankings and seedings don't match up, it's just a recipe for confusion and people getting mad.
Could still do it. Could still have the list of first ones out, and then here's the bracket without putting numbers, without doing it. Hey, here's this, here's that. And then you can let the AP do the top, just let the AP do their top 25, and we can all mock and ridicule them, go ahead and attack them. And then just let the college football playoff just be here's the bracket, here's the first ones out. Still a rollout each week. I think it's still a very important thing. But when you start having 2 numbers next to teams, I think you're immediately asking for people to be riddle me this.
Yeah.
Which number?
You're contradicting them.
There will be people who think Georgia is in because they're 12th in the AP.
Yeah.
No, without a doubt.
Can't blame them.
Georgia fans, though, no ball. So it's not if it was another school that wasn't as all in, and they're 12th in their head, we're in.
Yeah, they're the bottom seed. Yeah.
And it's but it is the first year, so maybe things will grow. There is a situation that could happen down the SEC. Let's go to Hammer. Dahn. Full chaos potentially, Tone.
Yeah, Reese, because this is our jobs, I assume you have seen this scenario as well. And it's not that wild of a scenario. Just if the SEC favorites win over the next 3 weeks, and those are the teams in the red boxes with the highlighter around them, and those are all favorites in this situation, and then you get the upset of Arkansas over Missouri, which is a lot of. I don't even know if that is an upset at this point. Even though
Drinkwitz not going to be happy.
Well, I know he's mad at everybody. He's retweeting everybody that was commenting on him during the game. But Arkansas is a good team, and Mizzou's been vulnerable points. Have you seen this where and then if LSU wins the SEC championship, and what happens then, Reese? What happens then?
I mean, LSU could get him with the 3 losses. It's the first thing. And that's not terribly far-fetched, but I'm going to tell you the one I'm rooting for, there's still a scenario in which we could have an 8-way tie for first place, which would be first and second place, which means all of those teams would have 2 losses. And the only significant upset you would need would be for, I believe, Auburn to beat A&M in Auburn, and then A&M to turn around and beat Texas. Now, we've seen SEC teams lose a bunch of road games this year, and it would take Georgia winning on Saturday night. And then they all would be, assuming that all other favorites won, then everybody would be 6-2. All of those contenders, and they have to sort it out. And that might still favor. I think I read someplace if that happens that LSU and Alabama would come out of that with a tiebreaker if that one were to happen.